This podcast is recorded on stolen and unceded Aboriginal land.
We acknowledge the First Nations and elders of this country, and we join their calls for justice.
Serious danger to Australia.
It's Serious Danger. It's Tom and Emerald bonus episode previewing a wonderful candidate running for the Victorian Greens in the upcoming election. We should say this whole thing is made possible with the help of the Green Institute and produced by Michael the Griff Griffin. You know that. But we are so close, less than a month from November 26th, aka my birthday, aka the election. Everyone's excited, equally excited about both events. People can't believe their luck. Daniel Andrews has an 11-seat buffer in the lower house. It holds 55 of the 88 seats. The coalition has to win 18 seats to turf Labor out, which is not going to happen. And there is a real chance that the Greens are going to do really well this election. Gabrielle de Vietri is running for the seat of Richmond, that is smack bang in Adam Band's federal seat of Melbourne. We're talking Fitzroy, Collingwood, Clifton Hill, you know, those kind of suburbs. Fitzroy recently elected the coolest suburb in the world, I think. In the world, maybe.
In the world. They must not have heard of any Brisbane suburbs. Strange.
A lot of focus on Richmond because the sitting Labor MP Richard Wynne is retiring. In 2018, the Greens got a primary vote of 34%. The Greens have come second in the seat every single election since 2002. Everyone's saying this is the year, baby. This is the time when Richmond goes green, which would be really cool. We thought we'd have a chat to Gab about her campaign, who she is, what she's fighting for, how the campaign is going, what she's hearing on the doors and stuff. I promise if you're outside of Victoria, it's not hopefully not too Victorian. There are insights and lessons to be learned here for other Green campaigns across the country. And also reflecting on Gab's experience being the mayor of the Yarra City Council, which was the first ever majority Greens government anywhere in Australia and potentially the world, according to this interview. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, some spicy discussions there. And yeah, don't worry, there is an appearance from like Queensland Greens door knocking Greensland strategy chat and Terry Butler and Trevor Evans. So, you know, it's good.
Sure.
I mean, should I also say, like, sorry, my voice changes halfway through because my computer had a meltdown and my video is also going to change back and then back again. So, you know, just a bit of fun for you all. Is
everything okay? Is your computer exploded or what's going on?
That's not exploded. It's warm. Maybe it's just too hot. It's pretty hot today.
It's so damn hot. Hot like this discussion about Victorian state politics. Here's our chat with Gabrielle. Go. We should maybe start. We're less than a month away from Election Day on November 26th, which is my birthday. You were telling us before we started recording, you're waking up every day with excitement, with hope and joy, and the prospect of victory in your heart. What are you experiencing? And there have been crazy experiences on the campaign trail, stuff that's come up door knocking. What's the vibe on the streets of Richmond?
There is so much optimism when we open the door. When we open the doors, when people open the doors to us door knocking. So many people just say, look, don't waste your time. You've got me. Like, I'm already a voter. How can I get involved? We've had that so many times, and it's just so exciting because people are very confident in the idea of voting Greens here. You can really, really feel the excitement from the federal election flowing over into the state election, and people are really excited about the idea of a really strong progressive crossbench. So we're waking up every morning for the last few months, actually, with a slight kind of excited shake. And it's just getting more exciting. I mean, this morning we had, in the space of 12 hours, four articles that mention that the Greens are going to take Richmond. It's really, really slated as the Greens' next big win. And I think it's been a long time coming. I think this seat should have been Green already. But this is the chance for us to get another Greens MP in Parliament and strengthen that crossbench and hold Labor to account.
Is anyone being angry at you? Is anyone going, no, Richmond will never be Labor? Anyone being angry or like slammed a door in your face? Any of that kind of juicy stuff? That's the kind of current movement we like.
You kind of see the hot spots, like those maps showing where the support is, and you can definitely feel it corresponding on the ground. Like we're knocking, we have a huge field campaign. We're knocking on almost every single knockable door in the electorate. So we're getting a really good impression of what people care about, the struggles that they're facing right now, the pressures that they're facing, and how they're going to vote. And you can see in that Labor hotspot, you can feel it on the ground. You've got people opening the door going, oh, yeah, I normally vote Labor. which is, a great conversation starter for us. And almost everywhere else you get, I'm a Green supporter. I voted for Adam. I'll vote for you. It feels great. Very exciting.
That's so good.
What do you say? Like, what's the what lines are you kind of using when people open that conversation with, I normally am a Labor voter? What are you finding is changing their mind?
It's interesting to know what gets them voting Labor, so to kind of find out a little bit more. And I think as well, like, people vote Labor historically. They're not actually we're finding they're not actually too attached to voting Labor. And for those people who have been voting Labor for a very long time, it's important to kind of make the distinction. This isn't the party of Gough Whitlam anymore. Labor have actually, in the 8 years of government, have really failed Victorians in terms of housing affordability, in terms of climate, in terms of the cost of living. There's so many levers they could have been pulling that they haven't been pulling because they're too concerned about their vested interests. And when you start cracking open the conversation and talking about how the Labor Party takes donations from the fossil fuels industry and they take donations from property developers, that starts to link in with the problems that they're seeing around the flooding and the fire threats, the cost of living and luxury apartments going up everywhere while they're struggling to pay rent. So they're kind of like linking it into their lives. And also this idea that, like, here in Richmond, it's a contest between Labor and the Greens. You're never going to get a Liberal candidate getting up as hard as he's trying, bless his cotton socks. And they have a choice here. They could either elect, a backbencher who'll vote to keep rents high and who'll vote to keep drilling for gas near the 12 Apostles, or they can elect a strong independent voice, someone who's been living here for 20 years, who's always fought for this community, to push the next government further and faster on the things that matter to them.
That's interesting, isn't it, right? Because obviously Richard Wynne, pretty high profile housing minister, but yes, I assume the challenger, the Labor candidate, the lady who was running to replace him as the Labor MP for the seat of Richmond, she would be a first time MP, so she's obviously not going to be necessarily, if she was elected, be immediately appointed to the cabinet or have the same kind of profile that he has. He's been in there for fucking forever, right?
That's right. Yeah, he's been in for 24 years. He's been the housing minister, the planning minister. In that time, housing, don't get me started, it's just run into absolute ruin. We've been door knocking in all the public housing towers and people are just at their wits' end. They just feel completely abandoned by the state government. They're living in apartments that have had, repairs sitting, waiting for years. They can't get through to the housing office. There's no staff in the housing office. It's completely closed. They've been waiting for a transfer for 10 years for their, kids. They're living in one-bedroom apartments with a big family. The last 24 hours has been really insightful as to the kind of abandonment that our housing minister and the Labor government has kind of presided over. I got a call, or I was chatting with a resident in public housing in Clifton Hill, and she was like, I don't know what to do. We've got this sewage problem. It's been like that for 5 years. And we just, we're all sick. Can you write a letter for me? So I wrote a letter, and then she came back the next day and she's like, it's going to flood again. We're expecting rain. What do I do? So I said, I'll come and have a look. And it was just the most appalling situation you could imagine. Like, conditions.
So this is like sewage waste leaking out of the sewage system.
In between the flats and their garden, there's a concreted area and there's a kids' playground. You literally have to step over shit to get to the swings.
Wow.
Like conditions you would not have expected in the last 2 centuries. And underneath the house, just burst pipes and piles of sewage and toilet paper. And they have called time and time and time again to get this problem fixed. And people turn up and say, I haven't got the right tools, or, like they just don't turn up or they get ignored. And you can see how worried Labor are about losing this seat, because I went with one of my volunteers who filmed a short video of some people talking and of the conditions there. We put it up and it got sent to the minister's office, the housing minister's office, who's not Richard Wynne anymore because he's retiring. And that got sent that evening, and by 10 o'clock there was a plumber out there trying to hose it away.
Shit.
The next morning we came. I came down on the site with a journalist, and there were more plumbers there, and there were 3 people in suits from the Department of Housing knocking on every door. Oh, sorry it's taken so long. What can we do for you?
Oh my God. That's amazing.
There you
It's
go.
really eye-opening.
Greens get shit done. There you go.
Yeah,
Now, of course,
exactly.
that probably isn't anyone's fault. And if you blame anyone for that, then that would be really bad. But we'll get to that in a sec.
But
yeah.
like, what a good example of what it might be like to have a Greens MP advocating on your behalf in that area.
Exactly.
Imagine that. If you're living in the seat of the former housing minister or whatever, it's still not getting done, then yeah, fucking hell, maybe time to try something else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gab, just really quickly, for people who aren't familiar and people outside of the state, obviously, and maybe across Victoria too, just can you give us the brief background of yourself, who you are, how you came to your politics, and how you end up being the Greens candidate for this seat?
Yeah. So I lived in the electorate for 20 years. I've been an artist for most of that time. But I've always worked in this area and fought for people in this area. As an artist, my art looked less and less like art and more like politics. I was leading divestment movements from the fossil fuels industry and the immigration detention industry, then went into legal work and worked for Refugee Legal, advocating for refugees and asylum seekers.
Just on that, Gab, people might remember you were particularly crucial in the Sydney Biennale boycott when it was it Transfield at that point was a major sponsor. People won't remember this. George Brandis lost his fucking mind, but you were really involved in saying to artists, hey, we can't support this kind of nonsense when this massive arts festival is being sponsored by people who are profiting from the torture of innocent refugees.
Yeah, so I was one of the artists in the exhibition, and I spent 2 years making an artwork, and then found out a month before the show opened, while I was shipping the work over to Cockatoo Island on a ferry, that Transfield was the major sponsor, and we kind of tried to brainstorm different ways that we could respond to it, but ultimately, like, there's nothing that justifies being associated with, like, or, you know, even supporting the immigration detention industry and the torture of refugees. So I pulled my work out, and over the next week or so, we had 9 artists that pulled their work out until the director of Transfield resigned and took his 11% share with him. And this kind of effect snowballed with superannuation funds divesting, huge public pressure on Transfield. They had to change their name and logo. They got sold out to a to like a Spanish company, that company said very shortly afterwards that they would no longer service the immigration detention industry in Australia.
Wow.
So that got me started on, like, what am I actually doing? I'm making artwork about social change. I'm trying to change hearts and minds. But how urgent are these situations that we're facing right now? And if I'm really interested in making an impact, if I'm trying to make a change, actually, what do we have to do to make that change? What the most significant thing that I'd ever done as an artist was to actually not show my work. So what does that mean about my effectiveness?
Brutal.
So that set me on a bit of a different path, and it got me to the point where I realized that I was always so as an activist, as an artist, as a paralegal, I was always trying to get someone else in a position of power to make a better decision, when I knew that most of the people in those positions of power were not capable of making better decisions unless, you know, there was the Greens breathing down their neck.
Yeah.
And, of course, you were the mayor of the Yarra City Council, and this is just my brief personal connection. So when I first joined the party in 2020, during the wackiness of COVID, I'm living in Collingwood. I signed up to the Yarra branch, and we had the local council elections that year in November or something like that, or September, November, something like that. And so I, do what I can. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. People give me some flyers to put in letterboxes. I do that. There's a bunch of lovely people meeting on mind-numbingly boring Zoom meetings, as we all were in 2020. And then those local council elections go crazy, and the Yarra City Council elects the first ever majority Greens government anywhere in the country in Australian history, which is pretty wild.
Some say anywhere in the world, actually.
Oh shit!
I think every other Greens government has been a coalition.
Coalition, there you go.
Yeah.
So I had a majority, so it was 5 out of the council. The council was very progressive era, traditionally very progressive indeed. 5 Greens councillors, 2 Socialist councillors indeed. And that was really exciting and really cool. And then over the preceding couple of years, there's been reasons why the Yarra City Council has entered into the news headlines, which many would argue weren't for great reasons, I suppose. And there's a whole lot of bullshit, and we talk about this a lot on the show, a lot, the way the media treats Greens, the way lots of people would want the first majority Greens government to fail. There was a lot of shit flying around, and I reckon just really briefly, could you reflect on give us an idea of like how much of the bad stories that affected the Yarra City Council during your time while you're on there was confected and worth ignoring, and how much of it was like some things that weren't working properly in part of the council? What are the lessons you learned from that time?
The biggest kind of overview I can give you, the like most succinct overview, is that being the first ever Greens majority council in the world put a huge target on our backs.
Yeah.
And what we saw from day one was kind of a deliberate program of undermining, of kind of, attacks, of, good old Greens bashing, as Paddy Manning put it. It was like, publishing an unapproved report from a council officer, and, suddenly the Greens majority council are responsible for things that they would never approve, that we would never have approved. There was some pretty really dirty kind of character assassination things that went on. And then, after claiming that we'd been in the media too often, the Labor minister decided that it would be a good time to put a monitor in, which, is kind of a signal to the world that things are going wrong. But actually, like in the scheme of things, we were functioning fine, and the monitors just left and dropped a report that basically says, yeah, you've got some financial issues and, there's some organizational things to fix up, but all in all, you're pretty fine. And, it felt so big in the moment. But stepping out of it and seeing in retrospect the kinds of petty attacks that were being levelled at Yarra Council consistently just makes me see how incredibly scared our kind of political detractors are at the rise of the Greens and the increasing power of the Greens, and how desperate they are to hold on to a seat like Richmond. Definitely seeing it in the context of this election. And in fact, we achieved some incredible things while we were, in that short time between being elected in 2020 and now. This Greens majority council has just done so many amazing things that kind of just go in the shadows of these distractions. So we fought off private developers trying to grab up our public land. We locked in 7 new green open spaces for the municipality. We transitioned 13 of our community centres off gas and onto 100% renewable energy, and we've put in place a plan to transition our big community centres, our leisure centres and our pools and our town halls off gas to be carbon neutral without offsets by 2030. And we've got a plan for the community to do the same as well. We launched our very first LGBTIQA+ strategy to protect and celebrate our community. We reformed our public drinking laws. That could go on and on. We had the biggest program of outdoor dining, turning car parks into outdoor dining spaces out of any municipality. And, that's actually the legacy of the Greens in council. But a lot of the things that I felt frustrated at, that we're working with a very small budget in a rate-capped environment. We had a hostile Labor government not wanting to give us any kind of support to run out our programs. We've also got a planning system that council is the face of, but it's absolutely run by the state government when it comes down to it. And it means that a lot of the tensions that we experience actually are systemic problems at the state level. And that's one of the reasons why I want to step up into the state government so that we can actually start to address some of those serious shortcomings that the state government has and that they impose on local government level as well.
So, because I think as an outside observer particularly, I haven't been able to follow or just haven't seen a lot of the details of whatever scandals or attacks Yarra City Council experienced. But I get the sense that one of the main charges is of NIMBYism, right? Which I feel is, local councils are necessarily engaged in local issues and I think more susceptible to that like NIMBYism politics. I guess, I'm curious to know how that happened, whether you think that there are any tensions that we as a Greens movement need to work through, lessons from that, or whether how much of it is just kind of a political attack from people who want to drive that perception of the Greens as saying no to everything. And I think this was particularly around, like the proposal to build housing in public space that had a small proportion allocated for public or affordable housing, but primarily would be like for developer profit, right?
Yeah. So we kind of inherited this project, which was about, which was basically proposing to give away one of the only chunks of council land to a private developer to build private apartments in exchange for like a handful of social units. And
it's about a fifth. So I've got this just from the Guardian article about it. So 200 units are going to be built on public land in Collingwood, 1/5 to be social housing with some funding from the government. Is that a fair summary?
So it would be $28 million from the government, $28 million to build like a tiny amount of social housing.
Yeah.
And we'd have to give the land, which was worth $20 million, to the developer. And that, to me, it stunk. It did not stack up at all. And, meanwhile, it's actually the responsibility of the state government to build public housing, a responsibility that they have neglected for decades. And, it was just not something that I could endorse, despite the fact that we need a whole lot of public housing. We need more affordable housing. And the Greens plan at the state level is a plan to address the housing crisis at all levels. And what we don't need is these new mega apartments, luxury buildings full of apartments for investors, which are just going to drive prices up. We need homes that are affordable for first home buyers. We need rental caps and stronger renters' rights. And we need a massive build of public housing to be able to clear the wait list of 120,000 people on our public housing waiting list.
So it was actually, more than, because, like I said, from the outside, it comes across as, this Greens council is rejecting this public housing proposal because they don't want it there. Is that the case that, like, if it had actually just been a big build of public housing on that site, that would have been appropriate, like something that the council supported?
I think that's much more likely. If the state government has said, look, we want to build more public housing and we want the council's land to do that, I don't think we would have batted an eyelid to giving away that public land. Yeah, I think we need more public housing. This state government has no plans to build public housing, by the way. That's all privatised model.
Well, that's fine. You don't have many people on the wait list anyway, do you, in Victoria?
Just a few 100,000. And the state government owns hectares and hectares of land that's already built up, that's ready for public housing. They sold off 578 hectares of land over a 10-year period to private developers. They've got almost a suburb's worth of public land in Fitzroy. It's called the Gasworks site, and they have built a stadium and a school on it, which in a little corner. The rest of it is going to be 90% given away sold to developers to build market rate apartments.
Bleak. And
that is public land. The rest of it is going to be like this social and affordable housing, which is not public housing. It's, still working with this private-public partnership where rents will be high, where the tenants won't have security. It's not going to move the public housing waiting list. It's not enough and it's not secure enough.
Yeah.
They're also, I just found, actually, I'm not going to say that because I'm not 100% sure that's true. Scrap that.
All right.
Exposed. That's fine. If people want to find out more about this, there was like a sort of, I guess, a summary of the case from The Guardian that, put a bunch of people's voices forward, including yours, Gab, reflecting on the Greens' tenure as on the City Council of Yarra. We'll put that in the show notes if people are interested in reading more about that. But as I totally take your point that the list of cool shit that the Greens does weirdly doesn't get in the papers as much as all the bad shit. It's very strange. Let's talk about the campaign for Richmond. You're running against Lauren O'Dyer. As we said, Richard Wynne is retiring after a long time in the position. Lauren O'Dyer is running. Anything we should know about her as the Labor candidate, putting her hand up? How's it all going? Have you faced off in any debates yet? What's the deal with Dimitri v. O'Dwyer?
Look, we did do a round of paper, scissors, rock when we met for a coffee.
Who won?
And yeah, fortunately she won, but I think that's, I'll give her that. I'll give her that.
Jesus Christ.
Thing is, we're not leaving this election.
Hang on,
up
did
to
you do
chance.
best 2 out of 3 or no?
No, we just did it once.
Only one.
Well,
one
We
round
should've
doesn't
done it 2 out
count.
of 3.
No.
That's really,
Yeah, exactly.
that
That's like just counting the first booth or
The
something.
first
isn't it?
pancake. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah. What was the question again? Who is she? She
Yes.
seems lovely. She seems lovely, but, she'll get into Parliament and she'll vote to keep rents high and she'll vote to keep drilling near the 12 apostles.
Yes, those things.
That's not that lovely.
Yeah, so don't vote for her.
Lovely as a person.
That's the official serious danger position to allow Richmond listeners. Don't vote for her. I was taken by this. Richard Wynne is he's on his way out, but he's still, digging in, still throwing a few bombs over his shoulder. In his valedictory speech to Parliament, he described the Greens thusly: "What a sad way to practice politics, to be always in the grandstand, never on the field of play, where the real work is done and the real progress won." Ooh! Very
Wow.
catty.
But, they won't admit that, so many of their progressive reforms actually started their lives as Greens policy.
Of course.
They won't admit that Ellen Sandell first brought a bill to end mandatory gas connections to Parliament. 2 weeks later, they brought their own. They won't say that the renters' reforms that they introduced in 2017, kind of coincidentally around the time that Lydia Thorpe was about to take Northcote, they wouldn't say that was a Greens idea that the Greens and the community had been asking for years. They won't say that the donations reforms that they introduced were a Greens idea. They quietly take up our ideas and they put them forward as their own, which is fine. That's what we're there for. And this most recent announcement about a publicly owned energy retailer. It's great news.
Yeah.
It's
but
pretty
it
wild.
started
Yes.
its life as a Greens policy. That's literally one of our top line energy policies.
Yeah.
And now what we want to see them do is stop drilling for gas and end our coal-fired power stations.
Yes, please. Hopefully, yes, that will be. I don't know. Is the Andrews Labor government again using the Greens? Sometimes again using the Greens by pinching policies or by moving to their left to outflank the Greens. And clearly, the Greens are serious threats. Obviously, in Richmond, also in other seats like Northcote and Albert Park. But are they also using the Greens as like hey, we're not as crazy as these guys. We're not as ridiculously as outlandish and sort of punching left as they sometimes want to do, to use the Greens as the crazy alternative and present themselves as the sensible centrist alternative. They
don't comment on our policies. If they comment on us, it's like very personal attacks. I think they're trying to look more and more like the Greens. I think they're just, which is exactly why we're there. That's actually great. We want them to be scared about losing these seats so that they take a good hard look at themselves and start implementing the progressive policies that Victorians voted for like never before in the federal election, and they're going to vote for those again, for progressive politics in the state election.
In the federal election, what was the increase in the Senate vote in Victoria?
That is a good question that I will have to get back on to you.
I think it was about 3% swing increase,
right.
Which again, of course, is all funny with the, Lydia Thorpe is not what Victorians voted for. It's like, well, she is, because more people than ever voted for the Greens of the Senate in Victoria and wanted more of that, please. So you don't know what you're talking about. So yes, that was across the state. It was 2 or 3% swing, I think, to the party.
Yeah, wow.
And those attacks on Lydia Thorpe are clearly an attempt to keep Northcote, keep the Greens out of Northcote.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
I want to get into like the just to finish up, Gavin. This has been great. Thanks very much for your time. But really quickly, before we jump into this last article that amused us very much, that might give us an idea into some of the campaign strategy going on in Richmond for your campaign. 2 really quick things that have been announced that I know that like you're really passionate about, that it might be worth. It could be really interesting to other Greens members across the country about stuff that the Victorian Greens are putting out there. Can you tell us really quickly about the artist living wage and the reproductive leave that the Victorian Greens have announced in policies this election?
Yeah. So the artist living wage is one of our suite of new arts policies in our Arts Everywhere for Everyone policy. The artist living wage is something we're putting forward as a trial for 2,000 artists over 3 years to give them a living wage, which at the moment is $42,200. We've been hearing, and as an artist myself, experiencing how difficult it is to make ends meet as an artist, even though our economy relies on us to the tune of 7% of our Victorian economy, and 8.8% of our workforce is employed in creative industries.
Yeah, right.
So our artists need supporting. We're going to, end up in 10 years without a kind of Victorian kind of contemporary culture if we continue to cut funding and undermine our artists. And they suffered a lot during the pandemic. So this is kind of in recognition of the stability that they need and the freedom that they need to be able to actually create the work that we all rely on and that we all love, and that actually feeds our bigger institutions, which I think get a lot of funding, but our small to medium and our individual independent artists don't actually get the support they need to be able to create the work. So, 3-year pilot program is what we'll be pushing for.
How do you pick the 2,000 artists?
So it would be a non-competitive process. So it's not like a grant round where you have to prove your worth and prove that you're better than the next person. It won't be available for everyone because it is a trial, but it would be about having some criteria that just to prove that you are a practicing artist, whether it's a visual artist or a theatre maker or a writer or a comedian or a musician. Absolutely. Yes. Well, yes.
Okay, great. More money for artists, particularly comedians and podcasters. That's what I took away from that particular policy. That's a good one. Yeah. Reproductive leave as well. This is a great scheme announced. This is, again, something for the public sector employees in Victoria that Victorian Greens are running on. An additional 5 days of reproductive health and wellbeing leave to access IVF and endometriosis treatments, contraception procedures, abortion, hysterectomies, stuff that people need for their reproductive health. That would be really good.
And gender affirming care as well.
Gender affirming, also be used if you're suffering a miscarriage or menopause symptoms or something like that. All fantastic stuff. And announced just this week, Gab, you're telling me you'll love this, Emerald, 4-day week trial. Tell us about it, baby.
Yep.
4-day week.
Yoo-hoo! So 4-day working week, 5th day to, look after your veggie patch or do a bit of self-care or spend time with the family.
Do a podcast. Because that's what I do with my day off.
Or do a podcast.
Do a podcast.
Which will hopefully be paid for under our arts scheme of full living wage. So you won't have to take a day off to do it, right?
For me.
It's a $60 million trial across the public and the private sector. So we'd work with unions to kind of work out how to implement the public sector part of it, and then the private sector would be grants to small to medium businesses so that they can transition a whole workforce to 4 days without any loss of pay or entitlements, and then a proportional increase in or decrease in work days or equivalent increase in wage for people who are already on part-time wages, which are usually, women or people with other responsibilities. So we don't want them to miss out in the process. And obviously it's because everyone's exhausted and we've got no work-life balance and we're all kind of overworked and underpaid, and a 4-day work week just makes sense.
And it's I know it's an annoying point to make because this shouldn't be the issue or shouldn't be the major concern, but all the trials that have been enacted prove that productivity actually increases, that it makes people happier and healthier and have a better relationship to work, and therefore a better little worker ants. I mean, I know that's not the way to sell it, but I suppose, of course, the immediate response is, the productivity slump that will result from this can easily be countered by the actual facts of how these things work out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the increase in well-being alone, just the flow-on effect is an increase in productivity, and if that's what matters to you, well, we win that argument too.
Yeah, damn right.
So we are going to be pushing for that, and we know that actually the Labor membership really wants it as well. There was a kind of a leak a couple of weeks ago as well saying that they were pushing for it too. So we reckon that, there's going to be a little crack there to really push hard for this.
Great. All right, we're going to wrap up in a sec, but it would be very remiss of us if we did not just touch on one article from the beautiful folks at 9 Fairfax that was looking at the Richmond campaign and about the fact that you guys brought in the big guns MP Max Chandler Mather, the mastermind behind the Greens' remarkable federal election success in Queensland this year. You brought him in to train up Greens volunteers across these three winnable seats, Albert Park, Northcote and Richmond. Were you there on the day, Gab? Did you get to see the master at work up close?
I was, and I did. We got to kind of workshop a few different scenarios at the door, and we actually had 3 hours of training, and then we all went out for a massive door knock. We had people, like 50 people out knocking on doors in Richmond afterwards. It was great. Very high energy, lots of people absolutely swooning over the mastermind. And like he really powered up our campaign, really skilled us up, but also just bumped up that energy and that feeling like we're going to win.
Tom, I literally just got the headline to this article.
Right.
The article headline is Greens Eye Maximum Success.
Oh, boy.
That's Max's name in the word maximum.
I get it now.
Such a smart pun.
Really good.
Funny.
This is Annika Smethurst and her take. There's a lot going on in this article that we need to touch on. First of all, it's sort of leading with, not necessarily with the fact that you got Max to help in with the Victorian election, but he's sort of saying that, I guess this is a direct quote, or Max talked to her, saying that Green supporters can be a bit preachy and that we shouldn't fulfill the stereotype of being a moralising lefty. So he says that's the status quo, but he would like to change that. Now, that's not totally wrong, right? That's something we've chatted about on the show before, Emerald, that this is a perception of the Greens and that's something that we want to avoid. And hopefully the success of the Queensland Greens is trying to circumvent or negate that perception of us as the party. Is that fair?
You asking me? Absolutely. I feel like I talk about this a lot. I feel like I talk about, the idea that people think that we hate them and we think that we're better than them. And that's what they may expect when we knock on their door. I also think that even though that is a massive barrier to success and something that we need to overcome, it's kind of an opportunity because people are so surprised when we contradict that expectation. And so literally all it takes is us being like, oh, no, actually, I totally get what you're saying. And they're like, whoa. And that can be a big moment of change.
Are you finding that, Gab? Because, and again, I'm saying this with all love and respect, it is easy to understand how some people might view yourself as an artist, a lady who wears green frame glasses sometimes, who lives in a suburban seat. You could be easily painted as the stereotypical Greens candidate, and people might have a bunch of presumptions about you and your politics and how you go about things. Is that something that you've thought about during your campaign, or something you have to try and tackle?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as a headline, artist and activist doesn't do much for many people. And, you've only got a few seconds to go, no, I've done some really meaningful stuff. And, it's actually not, it's not helpful. You actually have to have those conversations one-to-one and demonstrate that you're a real person and listen to people's problems and connect politics with their real life. And I think that that's why we've found door knocking has been so effective, because people get to understand that you are a real person. I'm a local. There's people out there who know me, who can vouch for me, and that's what having a massive volunteers out on the street does. I also think that there's a lot of people there's a lot of people in my community, whether it's the artist community, whether it's the public housing community, whether it's the community that rose up against the East-West link in the 2014. I have a long history of activism in this area. And so people do know that there's a lot more dimensions than a 20-word byline.
Yeah.
But I hope that you're not using any of these voters on the doors campaign or their anger to campaign, right? Because that's, if you talk to someone and they say that they're angry at the way that they've been let down by politicians and the government, the correct response is, you're wrong, calm down. We can't have everything at once. Stop it. That's what I understand, right, from this quote in the article from our fave, Terry Butler, who says that the Greens are very good at conflating the two major parties because they campaign on anger.
Yes.
People are angry, though. I don't think that's right. People are so angry. They're seeing people at the top getting richer and richer, and they're struggling. More and more people are struggling. What's not to be angry about? We're seeing,
Gabrielle.
Your audiences don't need to hear this.
This This is incredible, right? So they talk about Max coming to help out on these campaigns and give some tips, run some workshops. The polling suggests that the Greens are going to do very well, and Gab will be the next MP for Richmond, all going well. It says here that you will win the seat next month by pursuing anti-government sentiment. And then they talk to two federal MPs who seem to only get a call now to talk to the media about how they lost to the Greens. That's like their new angle. And they do bring in Terry Butler, of course, who lost in Griffith, and says that yes, this campaigning technique works because if you're angry and you want to blame someone, it's easy to convince voters that parties of government are the problem. They see us all as one thing.
Wasn't that actually Max Chandler Mather's line? Like, there's no difference between Labor and Liberal. Like, she's just boosting his campaign.
And also, that's not a line that Max made up.
No.
That's a line that we started using and recognizing as one of the most common things that voters would say to us on the doors.
Yes.
Like, that's the thing that, this disconnect for people like Terry Butler, like people in Labor and in the LNP, that they think that the Greens are just like making this shit up because they've never actually asked anyone. And if a voter tells them this, they're just like, oh, that's just a mean, stupid voter. That one I don't like.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Former Liberal MP Trevor Evans, who lost his seat of Brisbane to the Greens in May as well, believes the major parties have been hesitant to criticise the Greens in the past over fears that doing so will legitimise the threat. By doing so, Evans said the Greens have been able to outbid major parties on policy promises without being accountable, as they weren't a party of government.
Is that why the Greens have had a success? Because the Labor and Liberal haven't criticised us?
Yes.
No,
that's the only reason.
That's the only possible explanation I can see. If we check this quote out, if we're seeing the slow breakdown of the two parties, it will be increasingly important to start to criticise other alternatives. So not to improve the major parties, we can't get any better whatsoever. That would just be out of the question. We can't look at our own campaigning techniques or the kind of ideas that we're presenting to people or our connection with ordinary voters. No. We need to get better at hanging shit and terrifying people about these alternative parties like the Greens who are presenting ideas that people like. That's simply got to be the way we go.
Mm-hmm. That is outrageous.
But I guess the question is, like, is anti-government sentiment a part of your campaign? Are you able to campaign against either the Andrews government, the Labor Party, the lack of action, what the Andrews government is failing to do despite its, massive popularity and 11-seat majority in Parliament? How is that rolling out? Are you capitalising on stoking people's anger at the status quo?
I think it's less anti-government sentiment as it is apathy. Like, lots of people have lost confidence in politics. They've lost confidence in this idea that their representatives should be representing them. And we're hearing that a lot at doors. And there's this kind of like undercurrent of lack of integrity, of lack of accountability, and that kind of just smears over the whole parliament. And so I think that that's a really important discussion point for us, because the reason why we need a stronger crossbench is to be and filled with Greens MPs is to hold them to account and to push for further electoral reforms and donations reforms, and to make sure that they're not lining the pockets of their gas corporation mates and their gambling lobby mates and their property developer mates. Like, those are the things that will reinstill a sense of confidence in politics. So yes, we are campaigning on that, definitely.
I think that as an undercurrent is a good way to explain it, right? Because sometimes, like, I am critical of, for example, if we're talking about, what are our big issues this election, I'm critical of naming integrity as an issue itself. And I noticed I was reading the 9 Fairfax stories about their polling that they did to determine the big issues for the electorate in the upcoming Victorian election. And they frame it as integrity being the number one issue. But it's actually just that integrity is the most commonly named issue as something that's kind of important to everyone, to about half of the people that they asked. Whereas, if you ask people to name one thing, the most important priority issue, it's cost of living, like fairly predictable, right? And so for me, it's like, that kind of undercurrent of anti-political sentiment, of the idea that you can't trust politicians, that is the politics, the explanation for why you don't have the things that you care about. And so, yeah, you know, to go to an election saying, well, we need more housing, we need more relief for power bills, you know, we need better healthcare system, all of these things that will actually make a difference in people's lives. And the reason you won't get that from the major parties is because they are, you know, bought and sold to these big corporations.
Yeah.
And that's the current. So I like that as a framing, I think.
Yeah, it's like if the system had integrity, stuff would work, right? Politics would actually be responsive to people's needs. And it's completely understandable that people say, look, I don't know all the details. I'm not particularly invested in, you know, the liberal democratic tradition and the beauty and integrity of our political system. I just want stuff to work, and I want what the people want to have happen to actually happen. So, yes, get the fucking money out of politics. Drain the swamp, even a catch cry of the Trump campaign. You know, do something to shake up this system where clearly rich people and corporations have far too much influence and a grip on our politics at the state and federal level. I think that's totally reasonable for people to.
And I think that people don't necessarily know the details. They know that there's, you know, a crisis of integrity across all the things that they care about and all the pressures that they're feeling. But when you highlight to them, well, did you know that they take, you know, Liberal and Labor both take donations from the gambling industry? Did you know that they take donations from property developers? People are really surprised and something kind of clicks into place.
A final question also in this article was talking about the way that dirt has been used. In 2018, there was some extremely grubby shit that went down that basically sunk some Greens campaigns, including, you know, bringing up some rap lyrics from one Greens candidate from ages ago that don't represent his current views that he apologised for, but Labor went extremely hard on. And there is talk in this article that, you know, the stories around Lydia Thorpe will be used. Several Labor MPs speaking to The Age on the condition of anonymity to discuss campaign matters said the latest revelations that Thorpe, now a Green senator, had failed to declare a possible perceived conflict of interest in her relationship with Dean Martin would again be used to highlight some cultural problems within the party. Lydia Thorpe still has issues here, one Labor MP said. When they deserve it, holding them to account is important. So just openly telling the media, yes, we're going to use these perceived ideas of conflict of interest for a federal senator here in this state election campaign, something that has no, you know, policy content whatsoever, no real relationship to ordinary people's lives, but we will happily capitalize on these smears and use them as much as possible. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, Gab, and whether, you know, some dirty shit has yet to come out in the Richmond campaign, as far as you can see.
Yeah, well, we're seeing them try to do that. I've been knocking on doors every day in the last 3 or 4 weeks, so I've got a good sense of how things are landing, and honestly, it hasn't come up. I think one of my volunteers had it come up, and the feeling that they got was actually she admitted to making a mistake. There were consequences. Let's move on. This is actually, you know, this is how integrity works. You actually kind of work through problems, you admit to it. And, you know, like I don't see this being a big problem. I think most of people recognise this for the beat up that it is. It's kind of out of control.
Yeah.
And you don't think any of your old art is going to be brought out as an example of you being a crazy communist hippie or something from 10 years ago or something?
Maybe, but I reckon voters in this electorate will, you know, will love it. So I'm not worried.
It'll boost you. That's great.
It's like, you know, when that video of AOC dancing came out, and the person who leaked it thought it was just going to be the most salacious thing, that she was like lip syncing and sexy dancing around the uni, and actually it just like boosted her profile. Not that like I've got the kind of like kudos and sexiness of AOC in any of my artwork, but you know, maybe a similar kind of minor version of that.
Yeah.
I reckon. I think you're going to be just fine, mate. Gabforrichmond.com.au, that is the website if you're in the area. Obviously, please vote for Gabrielle or check out more policies and vote Greens. That'd be very nice. But obviously, volunteers, always needed, always beloved, always valued. If you can lend time or a little bit of money, you can always donate as well. If you can help out with this campaign, this is a real chance for the Greens, as is Northcote and Albert Park on November 26th in the state election. If if you won those 3 seats and held the 3 lower house ones we already had, plus picked up, some more in the upper house, joining Samantha Ratnam up there, that would be a pretty extraordinary boost for the party and would have a serious impact on the next Victorian State Parliament, where we could do some really, really cool shit. So go to gabforrichmond.com.au. Every single day is a day of action between now and election day. But people should obviously reach out and help out where they can. Anything else to finish on, Gab? Yes, please do. Yes.
Yeah, just, we've got 250 shifts of door knocking to fill between now and the election. So, and there's something for everyone as well if door knocking's not your thing. We've got envelope stuffing if that's your thing. So please show up. It's a really fun campaign to be on, and you can feel the energy. Our campaign office is on Smith Street in Collingwood. So drop in or give us a call.
It's so exciting. I haven't had campaign energy for a while personally, but I can feel it through the phone.
Awesome.
I love it.
All right. Good luck to you, Gab. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
it.
Serious danger to Australia.